Welcome to Burning Platforms. I'm Peter Lewis. This is a recording of an emergency town hall convened to discuss the tech industry's push to secure a general right to mine text and data. More than 1,000 creators and performers attended the event, which was hosted by Digital Rights Watch and featured DRW Chair Lizzie O'Shea, Professor Toby Walsh, Australian Writers Guild CEO Claire Pullen, and national icon Peter Garrett. Apologies, there are bits of Toby's contribution that are a bit muffled, but stay with it as it's a great conversation. Welcome everybody, and thanks for turning up to what we're going to call an emergency virtual town hall. My name's Peter Lewis. Amongst other things, I'm the host of the Burning Platforms podcast. And I'd like to welcome everybody to today's discussion. Before we get started, do want to recognise that we are all on stolen land, recognise the traditional custodians, recognise that First Nations people have always had to fight to retain control over their stories, and it's even more so with AI, where cultural appropriation is baked in, which is really what today's discussion is all about, what Nick Cave has called replication by travesty. The slow drip of AI that is appropriating our culture has become a flood. The Book 3 data scrape that gobbled up more than 180,000 books. New tools replacing voice artists and designers. GPTs impersonating artists and twisting their work for the amusement of others. And fully simulated music racking up millions of listens. This is the catalyst for today's town hall and the Productivity Commission paper on AI released last week, which called for a discussion on creating a general right to mine our data and text. So this is the result of a long-running push from the tech industry to overwrite Australian copyright law in the name of innovation and productivity. And so the Productivity Commission, having called for a discussion, is going to get one today. Over the next hour, we're going to dig into how our cultural work is being stolen, how our tech industry is now attempting to lock that theft in, and how we might respond at this critical moment to support our national voices. Now, we've had nearly 1,000 people register today, and I think we're all Zoom veterans, so you know how this all works. We'll use the chat, the comments, but please keep it nice or we will boot you out. We will have some time for questions during the hour. We've already had a heap come in and we'll do our best to sort them and respond either during or after the event. And for today, I think we'll use the Q&A and the upvote tool so we can let the wisdom of the crowd decide where the discussion goes. So leading us will be our terrific panel, although one of them I believe is running a little bit late, AI expert and author of a series of books that have been trawled, Toby Walsh. We also have Australian music legend and former Minister of the Federal Government, whose work has also been stolen, Peter Garrett. Hi, Pete. And Digital Rights Watch Chair, also the author of Stolen Property, Lizzie O'Shea. Hi, Lizzie.
Hi, Peter. Hi, everybody.
And the CEO of the Australian Writers Guild, who's been in the trenches over the past few years on behalf of Australian creators, Claire Pullen. Hey, Claire.
Hi, Pete. How are you going?
So let's kick off this discussion just by describing the moment we're in. And I might get you, Pete, to kick us off. You reached out last week and you got yourself active in the national debate over this. What does this moment mean to you?
Thanks, Peter, and thanks everyone for coming on for this very important gathering. So without getting into all of the technicals of it, and whilst recognising that we have an existential threat to artists in particular with AI, but it crosses out of that as well. I would describe this moment as a moment of reckoning, a moment of reckoning for the sovereign state, for Australia, a moment of reckoning for the government to see whether it's capable of recognising both the risks and the opportunities that are posed by AI, and responding in a way which safeguards the national interest. And when I talk about the national interest, I talk about the national economic, political and cultural interest. And obviously one of the focuses for me is one of the things that I've done and do is as a writer and a musician. So I'm particularly head up about it, as people will know. In terms of where we sit on the arc of history, it would be a foolish person to be predicting all of that. But for me, it's a little bit like, well, we can talk about the splitting of the atom. We can talk about sliding door moments. We can talk about when former Prime Minister Curtin decided that we'd lessen our ties with the United Kingdom as the challenges of the Second World War came upon us, and we went in for a full embrace or a fuller embrace with the United States. Not getting into all of the ramifications of that, but these historical moments are important, and how communities and governments decide to respond and what they actually do ends up effectively shaping and influencing the way we all live our lives, and certainly our kids and others for many years to come. So big tech is on a rampage globally. It's on a rampage which pays little heed or consequence to existing laws and regulations that apply particularly to copyright. It's a powerful force, and now that it's harnessing itself to the AI technical innovation or technological innovation, its power's even greater. And the only thing that really is going to stand in its way is concerted efforts by sovereign nations in partnership with their populations, and informed by good science, good understanding of governance, politics, and the existing regulatory framework, and a way of making that much stronger. For the music industry, it's indeed more than a moment of reckoning. It's a moment of absolute crisis, given what you mentioned in your introductory remarks, Peter, the way in which work is already pilloried and stolen, an industry that has got to deal with the intersection between Spotify and, of course, AI as well. The challenges that people face in getting heard in this country in particular are momentous. And I'm talking about myself and the Oils here, of course. I'm talking about everybody, but particularly young and emerging artists. Now, there's always going to be a few really good ones, smart, talented, in the zeitgeist that achieve that level of success despite the obstacles. But for many, many others who've got just as much to offer, the hill to climb is a high one indeed. I think that the cruciality of where we are is a challenge to us as a sector as well, to be able to organise effectively, to be able to make clear to the broader Australian population what's at stake, to expand the idea and understanding that people do have about copyright for a songwriter or a writer, or for someone who produces IP. It's pretty well known, but it's not necessarily well understood by others. And I think that's obviously an important communication task. But most of all, it's recognising what's going on. Under the guise of innovation, big tech is throwing AI at people's livelihoods and stealing their ideas, their productivity, and their intellectual property. That's not acceptable. We will contest it collectively, and I'm very glad to be a part of this conversation.
Great, and thanks for warming up the room, Pete, and a lot of love. And here comes the star of the show, Toby Walsh, as well, a man who has 2 dogs in this race. Toby not only is one of the godfathers of AI in Australia, he's also had his book stolen. So he's got so much to bring this conversation. So welcome, Toby. Before we get to you, Claire, just briefly explain the moment on behalf of your members and the broader collections of guilds that you're part of. This hasn't happened overnight. This has been a slow train coming, hasn't it?
It has been, yeah. And I think Peter's right to situate this in sort of a historical moment about how we as a country, how Australians relate to larger forces in the world. And in this case, the larger forces are tax-dodging multinationals that want to extract as much from us as they can for their own benefit. And what's been extracted, particularly from my members, but also from, I think, the majority of people on this call, not me, I'm not an author who's had their work stolen, is text. It's their words, it's their intellectual property. just to clarify for everyone who's on the call, in case you're not as deep in the weeds on this as we all are, big tech companies who have built AI models, large language models, LLMs, have deliberately sought out as much text as they can to input in their models, because the purpose of the models is to build probabilistic understandings of the relationships between words. So how often does this word follow that word? What does the sentence look like? They have gone after everything. So your Facebook posts, any books they can access. In the Senate inquiry, it came out last year that they're pretty clear that they've used pirated works as well. Some of these companies have transcription software listening to films, to videos, to short form content, and they put the transcripts in as well, all in the service of building these models that are the best at predicting the relationship between the words. And to sort of characterise why this is a problem, when I was in New Zealand talking to our New Zealand members a couple of weeks ago, in these models, your racist uncle's rant about all the things that are wrong with the world are given the same weight as a songline or a storyline, the mana, or a story of someone's whakapapa in a Māori context. And that is our cultural, communal understanding of ourselves and the story we tell the world about who we are. This belongs to us, not just those of us that are individual creators, where we derive an income from owning that piece through copyright, but this is the communal story we're telling each other about who we are and telling the world about what we do. And these big tech companies have just taken that entirely brazenly, and in public do acknowledge both that they've taken it without compensation or permission, but also that their models don't work without it. And for those of you that follow this closely overnight, you would have seen that Anthropic, which is one of the big AI firms in the US, have said if they have to pay creators for the work, they'll go out of business. Now, the response to that we should have is, well, your business model's wrong. If you rely on theft to build your business, you've built the wrong thing. What we've seen from the Productivity Commission, unfortunately, last week is a response going, well, why don't we retroactively make that theft okay? So my members have been working on this issue now for a couple of years because their works are among the first that have been taken, because text is the easiest thing to steal. And we're now at the point where the smaller screen creative guilds are working really closely with us. There's a coalition of us in the broader rights holder community, so that's the big media and some of the big movie studios, talking about what we need our government to do to make sure that Australian creative works don't just disappear. We don't lose that cultural meaning creation that we do together, but in purely economic terms, that we don't lose a $60 billion a year industry to these foreign big tech companies who don't pay any tax here.
Yeah. Claire, we'll come back to the actual the right to data mine in a minute. I'm conscious we've only got Toby till about 1:30, Toby. Not if that is correct. So I'm really keen. I'll just get a really quick situation from Lizzie, and then we might just pick your brains for as long as we've got it. So, Lizzie, this is part of a bigger story as well, isn't it?
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, I won't be long. I mean, I did just want to introduce myself and the organisation. So I'm a founder and the chair of Digital Rights Watch. So for people who don't know, we're hosting the webinar today, but we're really excited to be involved in this space because we've been working on these issues for a long time. Our mission is to advocate for freedom, fairness, and fundamental rights in the online world. And the biggest and most powerful companies in the world today are technology companies. The development and the design of sophisticated technologies is being guided by a tiny selection of mega rich elite. And they see the material concerns of many everyday people, things like decent work, environmental sustainability, creativity, and human dignity, as things really to be swept out of the way in service of total technological dominance. So we at Digital Rights Watch have given ourselves the job of taking on these powerful interests, but perhaps most importantly, building a movement of people that can hold large corporations to account while also making sure elected representatives remember who they work for. So I can talk more about the kind of advocacy strategy we want to run later in the seminar. I know a lot of people have questions in the chat about what we can do about this and how we can shift the direction in which we're moving. And we've got some ideas. But for now, I think it's probably worth listening to Toby give us a good explanation of what actually goes on from a technical sense.
Absolutely. So, Toby, thank you for sharing your brain with us today. Let's start with, why is creative content so valuable to these models?
Yeah, that's a good place to start, because it's not just that they want to be able to predict the next word. If you just wanted to teach an AI to be able to have a command of language. So it could be used as a customer bot and be able to have a conversation with you. You could train it on works that weren't in copyright. There's plentiful amounts of words that aren't in copyright. But they also wanted the knowledge that is in those words. They wanted, ChatGPT, for example, to be an expert of everything from artificial intelligence to zoology. And so they trained it on books because they're the highest quality words you can find, are books about artificial intelligence. They trained it on my books. They also trained it on lots of other people's books about artificial intelligence because then it became an expert on artificial intelligence, not just able to be able to talk to you, but to be able to talk to you about artificial intelligence. That's also why they trained it on the New York Times, because they wanted to be up to date with current events. So it's that knowledge that they want, not just the language that they want.
So what do they, just for people, like everyone's concerned about this, I don't know if everyone quite knows. So they basically scrape text off the internet and then feed it into their models. Is that how it works? Like, how do you explain it to dummies like us?
Yeah, I mean, so ChatGPT was trained on a good chunk, a third maybe of the internet, the better quality third. And there's some strange, perverse bit of legal reasoning that goes on, which is if it's free to read, it's free to steal. I mean, it's just because it's freely available does not mean you have the copyright permissions to take it and use it. And now set up a business in competition. It's quite interesting. So if you type a search into Google today, before you get all the search results, you get an AI overview, which is a language model like ChatGPT has summarized the search results and given you a summary. And if you look at the data, you get about half the click-through rate that you used to get when people had to follow the links and go to the media websites or whoever's website and read the content there. Most people just read half the people read the AI overview and don't go on. So the value that people used to get by sharing the information with Google, which is they'd get traffic to their website, they'd get subscriptions or whatever, they get advertising revenue. A lot of that's being diminished by the fact that Google now just gives you an AI overview and no one goes there.
There's a fair bit of doom in the chat and the questions. We were discussing a few weeks ago some work around data poisoning. Can you just share that with people about how some artists have stopped their or have used the scraping of their material to actually poison some of the models?
Sure. Yeah. So there's been some quite fun, innovative work to stop people downloading their content and training on it. Which works on the fact that these AI models are quite brittle, much more brittle than human intelligence. And you can change just a few pixels, just a few dots on the image, and you can fool the AI into thinking that that's something quite different. Instead of it being a gun, it's a tortoise, or vice versa. Instead of being a tortoise, it's a gun. Something that humans, but those few dots wouldn't fool a few humans, but is enough to fool the AI. So if you want to put up, a picture of a tortoise and you don't want people to steal it, you can put a few of these adversarial dots into the image, which will protect it from being then used. It won't stop humans looking at it, but it will stop AI bots scraping it and using it to train on. That works with images. Unfortunately, it doesn't work with text. Text is words, you can't substitute many different words without changing the meaning quite radically, whereas images, you can corrupt them with a few dots and that will work. So it works for protecting images or can work for protecting sound, but it doesn't work for protecting text.
And of course, there's also this case in the States, which I know you've been following, where there is a bid to force models that have stolen copyrighted material to basically, I don't know what the word is, but get rid of it. Is that a viable path forward?
Not really. I mean, the only way to have confidence that the model doesn't have the stolen data in it is to treat it as Lizzie, I'm sure, would call the poison, the fruit of the poison tree. And destroy it, which is the only way that the information is embedded in it in a very in a very obscure way. It's very hard to point out, I could just cut this little piece out. The only way to be confident is to destroy the whole thing. And indeed, there has been one lawsuit I know of where the judge insisted that the poison model be destroyed as a way to ensure that no one was profiting from the stolen data that was trained on.
So if you have a question for Toby, there is the Q&A function. Chris has asked, much in the way we seek to label modified food, is there an existing push to label AI content on streaming? Like, is that one way? Is labeling part of the mix, Toby?
Well, I think labeling would be helpful, because otherwise we're going to drown in a sea of misinformation, disinformation, which is going to be ever more convincing. That the few tells that used to exist will no longer be human perceptible. But it doesn't solve these fundamental problems themselves, which is that we want to ensure that people have appropriate incentives to generate this information, because it adds to our human society. It adds to the body of literature, the body of art, the body of things that add extra meaning to life. And those artists, those people generating this content, need it not to be stolen. They need to be part of a ecosystem which rewards them for their efforts, so that we can all enjoy the fruits of their slave labours.
I might throw over to the panel if anyone got questions for Toby.
I don't have a question, but I did want to pick Toby's brain a little bit. I think labelling, you're right, is definitely part of the mix. But I'm sort of wary of anything that pushes the responsibility back onto an individual consumer or citizen to be the solution to the problem. We've seen in the US, Disney is suing Midjourney about copyright infringement. And part of the defence that Midjourney has made is that, well, we don't think this is copyright infringement, but even if it is, it's not us that's doing it, it's the individual user, which opens up, I think, a really dystopian possibility of an individual person who is unfamiliar with copyright law, which, to be clear, like, is a normal person's brain, is not familiar with copyright law, logging on to create a Minions animated birthday card for their 4-year-old, being sued by Disney, which is this massive corporation in and of itself. So, Toby, could I invite you to reflect a little bit about solutions that might actually locate the problem with the cause, which is the big tech companies, rather than, like, labelling puts the onus on an individual consumer. So I'm just a bit concerned about that aspect of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, copyright was invented as a legal response to the challenges that printing gave us, and I do wonder if we need, maybe to invent a new way of protecting the intellectual labours of artists and graphic designers and musicians and everyone else, where we've got AI that can generate increasingly realistic content that is in their style. But it's not fair use in the way that fair use was developed. I mean, fair use was developed to protect individual authors and individual authors' work, whereas we're talking about systems that work at an industrial scale, way above what any human can. And so it's not surprising the law is struggling to keep a pace, but it's wrong to compare it to the fair use that humans have. You can generate. You couldn't, as a human, you couldn't be able to generate millions of books worth of content, whereas these language models can. It's a completely different industrial scale for doing it than humans are doing it, and they are actually memorizing a huge amount of the content. You can get. I remember telling my publisher, you realise that my work's been used. The work that you paid to publish has been used to train this language model. And they said, well, how do you know that? I said, well, you can ask it the contents of chapter 5 and it will give you an absolute perfect summary of chapter 5. That's not what humans can do. We may be inspired, but we won't be copying word for word large chunks of chapter 5.
Lizzie?
Yeah, I was just going to ask Toby if perhaps you could talk about some of the other social consequences for the web that are associated with this development or this new model of extracting information for the web to train LLMs. Like I noted today, I saw an article about how the Wayback Machine is going to be blocked from taking shots of Reddit, for example, for preserving that for people to use. Now, people don't use the Wayback Machine for commercial purposes, really. I mean, there's some, but it's limited. But they use it for all different purposes. It's kind of like a public resource. But now, because it's used by crawlers to train LLMs, it's going to be blocked from accessing Reddit. And there are these other implications. Reddit's an obviously a huge repository of text that is used to train these models. And now it is closing down the way it is available to people on the web. And that has impacts for moderators, for example, and the tools that they use. I wonder if you could talk about some of those other downstream consequences for a more open web, moving to a more closed one as a result of this development in technology and the associated commercial benefit that these companies are trying to obtain.
Yeah, I mean, we've always had this tension. I mean, the internet, of course, let's not forget, was invented as an open resource, where you weren't allowed to do anything commercial on. And we've always been trying to resolve that.
I think we've caught him mid-act. There was actually, Pete, a couple of questions for you while we're waiting for Toby to come back on, particularly around that trade-off between musicians. Here he might be back. Nah. You just lagged out a bit there, Toby.
Sorry.
Why don't we go? Have you got a question for Toby, Pete, before we need to leave him, and then I'll throw the question back to you?
Well, many, but none that are urgent. I've had a chance to read his very good book.
Books. So I might just finish that question here, Peter. There's a number of people in the chat sort of talking about the trade-off if you're a musician between using the AI and not wanting the content to be used. Like, how should people who are creators think about this at the moment, do you think?
Yeah, no, that's right, Peter. I've noticed some of that commentary coming through, questions coming through as well. So I think the key thing for me to remember is that so long as there is an enforceable, transparent, regulatory framework, the word that I see a lot is guardrails, it's sort of the word of the day, but framework, then sovereign actors, musicians, IP producers, creatives, and consumers, as well as people that want to make money off it subsequently by copying or reproducing, have got a set of rules that they have to abide by and take into account. And for musicians, and APRA and AMCOS, the publishing societies, the Managers Association, MIA, the Musicians Union, and others, have been making it pretty clear, because musicians in a sense are amongst the canaries in the, let's say, in the coal mine here, because we are already under the pump in this way. But the demand is quite a modest one. If the work of a writer, a songwriter, a dancer, an author or whatever is worth anything at all, and if it's our work, then if someone wants to use it, they have to ask our permission. And if they want to use it to sell something, then they have to offer a fair remuneration for it. And that needs to be a transparent and enforceable interaction. And notwithstanding all of the problems that we do face as creatives, or that creatives face in the copyright world, at the moment we do have a framework that enables that to happen. And in fact, for most bands, and certainly artists in Australia, with some exceptions, the only way they can really make anything approaching a living is if they're able to copyright their work and their songs and then see their returns come, because they're collected by copyright agencies. Now, really, musicians are really and artists and creatives are the front line, and the rest of the population, our comrades, if you like, our colleagues, are with us as well, because they will be subject to the same depredations and pressures, not being able to know whether something is true or false, finding that they're being fed information that has been stolen from somebody else and is portrayed as not that, and so on and so forth, right through to the dystopian views that some of us have, when you look at the fact that President Trump's AI initiative actually has a specific policy frame, which is, not to have diversity, inclusion, and mention climate change. I mean, give me a break. We could see quite clearly what this is. So for all of those questions that are coming in and the things that musicians face, our expectation and my expectation is that politicians do their job. They've already had inquiries on it. They've already had reports. There's already a copyright regime in place which could be strengthened. And when I came onto this webinar virtual town hall meeting, and yesterday we saw newspaper reports saying that some parts of the government were going to favour what's not nominally called the light touch of regulation. Well, I'm sorry, the light touch is not going to do. AI is massive. It's got all these complexities in it, which we're discussing today, and the threats, which are enormous. So you need a robust response.
Thanks, Pete. So Toby's left us. He could only be here for a short time because I think he's flying between cities, but it was great to get a little bit of his expertise. Let's talk about the politics, which you've opened it up now. Let's start with you, Claire. You're trying to corral the guilds. At the moment, the Productivity Commission's put it out there to have a discussion about the right to mine data and text. What happens now?
Look, I'd actually go a little bit further than that. The Productivity Commission would say that they've put out their paper and it's just for discussion. But if you read it, it's pretty clear they're advocating for a particular position. And in terms of copyrighted works, there's two proposals they've made. The first one is around what's called a TDM exception, so text and data mining, which is essentially removing copyright where it exists for text. And obviously, and I think Lizzie will probably talk a bit about this, there is data that exists in the world that is not copyrighted, but is still critically important to the person who it's about. So there's a text and data mining exception, which removes a whole income stream from artists. So like Peter was talking about, I run the screenwriters collecting agency, so I collect royalties for Australian and New Zealand screenwriters. And for some people, this is a really critical part of their income, that when someone watches an episode of TV, they get paid a royalty. That's the end of that if text and data mining comes in. And you're essentially creating the competitor to the screenwriters of the future, because you won't have a writer in a room, you'll have a prompt from, I suspect, the lowest paid person in a screen production company tapping away on a laptop. So that's one of the proposals, TDM. The other one is what's called fair use, and this is a term from US copyright, which is much less strict than our copyright regime, which says some uses of copyrighted materials are fair use. Now, I want to be clear that even in the US, this is not a free-for-all, and all the litigation that's going on in the US sort of indicates that. But what this requires in a real-world sense is for an artist or a creator to sue an AI firm. So just to put that in context, one of my playwright members, if they get a play commissioned for a main stage in Australia, their commissioning fee is $17,000. And the Productivity Commission is essentially pretending that that playwright and Google or Amazon and Meta have equal standing and equal capacity to contest something in the courts. Like, it's completely farcical. And the suggestion is that you could have both of these, both that the copyright is taken away and there's a fair use exemption in place anyway. So I just want to be really clear from my point of view and from all the guilds and creator representatives I've spoken to, the Productivity Commission isn't saying let's have a discussion. They're pushing quite hard for these changes and have been for about 10 years. Like, the fair use exception is something they've been pushing.
So this isn't an AI thing. This is something that's been around longer than that.
For a really long time as a way of making big tech's lives easier. The guilds, the creative community, have been incredibly responsive on this, because artists understand that for a lot of us this is an existential threat to the future of our jobs and thus our industry. The creative guilds are meeting regularly on this, but there's also a bigger group we're really lucky to have the assistance of, which is rights holders. It's not normally people we're always very aligned with, but we're talking Nine, News Corp and the big motion picture studios, because they're in the same boat as us, in that things that they own are being stolen and reproduced and fed into these AI models. And at the moment, we're frantically trying to talk people out of this inevitability that AI is pushing. And I think it's really important to note that we're being propagandised at so hard that AI is here and it's inevitable and it's going to be great, and you individually are going to get $4,000. AI is going to make you.
All right. If you read that report and replace the word AI with God, it sounds like a call to prayer.
I am not a Luddite by any stretch of the imagination.
I love the Luddites, by the way. You should be a proud Luddite.
I'm extremely excited about the smashing of the machines at the moment, Peter, but I think it's important to note that artists and creators, my members, are not anti-AI. They have looked at this and gone, I can see the possibilities for making this part of my work, the non-creative part, less of my time, and I get more time to create. So I think it's about making sure that decision makers are aware of just how big the threat is, because there are some countries that have TDM and fair use and they don't have creative industries. And that's a decision that policymakers are being asked to make. And I particularly just want to point out that part of the propaganda effort is to pretend that AI is all one thing. Medical research does not rely on stealing plays and poems and songs from Australians. If you want to design a new cancer treatment, go nuts. I am very much in favour of that, but you do not need to steal from my members to do that.
So at the moment, there is a call for submissions to the Productivity Commission. Is that how this is going to work?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the interim report came out last week. You can find it on the Productivity Commission's website. And they have said that what they're after is hearing from the community and from creative representatives about what we should do next. So if anyone is feeling like they want to make a submission, fill your boots. Now's the time.
And we'll have a few tools to make that easier later. So this is not happening in a vacuum, Lizzie. There has been a longer term movement, I guess, of which you are the figurehead, because there isn't a huge digital civil society. Haven't had privacy laws properly updated for 40 years, since before the internet was a thing, light touch regulation in a whole lot of areas. What's the bigger picture for people that are just coming into this because they're performers or creators who are worried about what AI is doing to their work? What's the bigger picture here?
Yeah, well, it feels like it's my responsibility to talk also a little bit about some of the other things that are in the Productivity Commission report, but generally what's on the agenda for industry. So the PC report also talks about, for example, the need for some kind of regulation in respect of privacy, but actually not like this, not like this, not like this. And what we currently have probably needs to be rolled back. So a push to also relax regulations on personal information. So I'm here to talk about why I think privacy actually is fundamentally important, and that this is a set of data that is being used by these companies to train their large language models, other models on, and we need to rethink that. The Privacy Act has been subject to years of review. There's a bunch of proposals on the table that the government has already accepted need to be made, but they haven't actually implemented them. They've implemented some, but not all, and not some of the most significant ones. And that's a big problem for Australians because, of course, also AI is only as good as the data it's trained on. And this includes not just copyrighted material, but also personal information. And that personal information was often collected for an entirely different purpose than training a large language model, for example. And that has obviously quite serious ethical implications. Like, I don't think it's right that you share an information for one purpose and then it's used for an entirely different purpose, one that might not even have been imagined at the time you originally shared that personal information. But it's also got implications for the efficacy of these systems. There was a recent study that I think gives a good insight into how this works. It was having users pose as people seeking advice, as job seekers from a large language models. And in that instance, in essence, the advice given to users posing as women job seekers was to seek lower pay in negotiating an employment contract than for men. And some of these differences were quite stark, right? So for the same position, a man might be asked to ask for $400,000 as a trained medical specialist, but for women, the advice from the chatbot was $280,000, right? That's because these models have been trained on data, on personal information, on copyrighted information. It's reflecting back what information it's been trained on. And because that wasn't for the purposes of creating a chatbot to give advice to people who are seeking jobs, it does a really bad job of it. And what we end up getting is decision-making systems that have the gloss of neutrality that comes with this kind of machinery, but in fact conceal all sorts of bias and discriminatory trends that are reflected in that data. And the attempt is to perhaps address this after the fact if it's brought to their attention. But in reality, I don't think these companies are motivated to care about this much at all. And so I would argue this is a huge problem, where if we allow these kinds of decision-making systems to have an impact on cultural production, on how we go to work and what our rights are at work, on how we access government social programs, there can be all sorts of problems inherent in how this decision-making occurs. I mean, there is also, I'll just add quickly, quite serious security implications. People might have seen the example recently that McDonald's uses a chatbot to solicit applications for jobs in the United States. So that's how you apply for a job at McDonald's. It's been a long time since I applied for a job at McDonald's, but that is how you have to do it now. But in fact, what they use is this chatbot that had no security really that's at all meaningful for this purpose. And as a result, a couple of security researchers with a bit of curiosity and clever prompting managed to extract every single person's personal information who'd applied for a job at McDonald's. They managed to extract it from the AI model. So it increases the security risk if this kind of personal information is being gathered up, stored and kept and used to train these models without appropriate security in place to protect people who are required to share their information for the purposes of accessing basic things, including things like applying for a job. So they aren't within the framework of thinking of these large companies because they're not being forced to think about it. And I would argue it's the job of our elected representatives to make them think about it, to make us think about how we can create AIs that actually solve real world problems for real people, that are focused on sustainability, on encouraging human flourishing, on coming to decisions that are valid, but that are also able to be interrogated and appealed, so that we have a system of decision making that incorporates feedback that treats people as rights holders with dignity instead of a mass upon which we impose these systems upon. And I'd like to think there's lots of ways in which we can advocate to change that. So we do this kind of advocacy work, we build movements, we're trying to build as many people, a movement of diverse interests, a network as big as possible, united around some of these common themes of holding these companies to account, of finding ways to return the benefits of automation to everyday people, not just to the pockets of billionaires. And we'll be doing work around this in future. So if you don't want to receive emails from us, you should tell us, of course. But what we would like to do as this Productivity Commission process unfolds is to help people, make it really easy for them to make submissions. The submissions are due mid-September. We'll create a way for you to do that simply, that you can tinker and then submit yourself. We want to make it clear that lots of people feel really strongly about this, that we're going to intervene into these Productivity Commission processes, but also that we're going to try and make our cause known to politicians whose job it is to look at this advice and work out what to do next, so that we can argue for AI in the interests of the many rather than the few.
Thanks, Lizzie. Talking about elected representatives, you've got a little bit of experience about what makes elected representatives tick, Pete. There's a few questions in the chat, how to get creators and musicians and writers organised on this. And I think it's not just them. I think that in a way you guys are the canary in the coal mine, but that also means you're the leader as well. What's your thinking of what's possible with your community and the community that's joined us here today?
Well, I think it's possible to persuade a government that takes the national interest and the interests of its citizens to heart to have a robust economy-wide AI framework which stops us being ripped off and provides the necessary guardrails and clarity for the best of a technological innovation to benefit the most with the least possible incursion into our lives. And by incursion, I mean being thieved or finding that you've got to go up against a Meta or a Google as an individual, which of course is utterly onerous and not possible for anybody. So I really endorse what Lizzie has said, and I think that we're clearly going to need to have a strong alliance, and there's one already there, and it's just a case of the energy and the number of people who see this as critical and urgent and are willing to put the time in and to be a part of it. And I strongly encourage people to to feed back to the Productivity Commission, but equally importantly, to be ready and willing not to be too cynical about politics as not to be involved, but rather to be putting the pressure, the lobbying pressure, the community pressure, the individual pressure on your own MPs, on ministers and on the government to demand nothing less than the most robust response to this that we can have. I mean, here's the rub. Broaden it out from creatives for a moment and think about the way in which these big companies generally behave. They do not have an ethical centre at all. And you can see that in the depredation of social media, the influence and the material that can go to young people and the like. I can quote from the Australian Financial Review, that left-wing rag. The world's biggest tech companies are diverting billions of dollars out of Australia, paying minimal tax while complaining about local news and media rules and regulations, opposing local content quotas on streaming platforms. That's the AFR. Now, that's their agenda. So here the weights have got to be put on our government.
Mm.
And that means political organisation, it means alliance building, it means a focused effort, and it means not accepting that the debate can be corralled or that any half-baked solutions are going to be acceptable. I'm concerned that AI and big tech, well, big tech with AI has gone into a full court press on our political system, and particularly on the federal system. They can afford the lobbyists. The fact of the matter is that a lot of ex-Liberal and Labor Party staffers and advisors now work for big tech. I'm concerned that without thinking it through clearly enough, policymakers won't essentially subject the slogans to sufficient scrutiny. Scott Farquhar got up at the National Press Club and talked about copyright blocking innovation. What he really did was step up and say that we should be allowed to steal people's copyright so we can make more money. I mean, this is really the world that we live in, and the common interests of Australian voters and of Australians generally can only be secured by the Australian government, and the Australian government has to feel the pressure and the voices from people on this matter, and we have to build a community of interest and the alliances necessary to force that change.
Yeah, well said. I guess the other point here is that it's not just the performance, it's everyone that, like me, love Midnight Oil, love culture. Like, this is actually a cultural moment. And the one asset that I think in this room are people who, through their passion, their creativity and their skills, have the capacity to reach other people, either through their work or through their networks. And you are right. There is a mismatch in terms of the firepower inside the building in Canberra. There is a moment in that traditional media also sees big tech as an enemy, so our enemy's enemy can sometimes be our friend. And there is a moment now where traditional media channels will amplify. You're on the front page of the Oz. Who would have thought? I think the last time you probably, I don't know if you've had.
I did have devil's horns the last time.
I was going to say that. So there is a moment here, but it's not just. The bit that I'm particularly interested in, and maybe for the whole panel, how do we work, not use, but how do we work with creators to build the broader alliance of people that love your work?
So I'll hand over to Claire and Lizzie in a second, but just very quickly to say that we have to work together and we have to be prepared to put in the time and make the effort. And you're right, Peter, it's not just the creative work of a band from the 70s or the 80s. It's all of the work that's being produced by people from, creative colleges all the way through. But underneath that, there's something even more fundamental, and that is this is an expression of Australians. It's their voices, it's their culture, it's their and our stories. And our Australianness, and by that I don't mean it in a jingoistic way, I just mean it in a sense of our identity as people who happen to occupy this country at this place at this time, having deoccupied it from Indigenous people quickly, it's said. But even, and we haven't got on to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art and rights and the capacity for rip-offs there. That's another serious issue. But the point is a simple one, and that is, in as much as anything can be made simple, the threat here is literally to our cultural, political, social and economic sovereignty and capacity to make decisions and to be protected in an environment where there are massive behemoths of unparalleled power and influence with extremely powerful technologies getting ready to let rip. And if we don't take it up to our politicians, then we'll be left as roadkill on the side of the road. It won't just be musicians lying there wounded and bleeding. It'll be all the punters. It'll be all of us.
Thanks,
I do
Pete.
just want to add something if I could, because I think Peter's done a really good job of explaining what's at stake. But I would also say, part of the reason why people's online experiences can be so unpleasant and often harmful is that the business model that undermines a lot of the spaces that we participate in is focused on data extraction. And if we permit these kinds of exemptions and make these accommodations for large language models or other AI functionality, we are essentially greenlighting an acceleration of corporate digital surveillance, entrenching power dynamics of these mega companies over democratic processes, and actually prioritising profit over human rights and human creativity. Digital Rights Watch for a long time has argued that loose laws around these data extractive business models is what gives rise to significant threats to our democracy, because the information landscape is shaped by content that is engaging, that's not necessarily good for our democracy. It prioritises and monetises polarizing extremist content, and it undermines the very the preconditions for a democracy, which is to find common cause across social divides. So the way these models work have implications obviously for our creative sector, obviously for people's personal privacy in a human rights sense, but also more generally, I think, for how our democracy functions. If we don't hold these companies to account, we will lose quite a lot is at stake, right? But there are methods available to stop this. There's lots of different policy proposals on the table that this government has committed to, or that will be considered by this government, that we can intervene on. We want to organise people to do something about it, because in our experience, if you do get together, try to make an impact and participate in these processes, you can change the direction in which they're going. I don't think we're powerless in this moment, but we do have to invest the time, invest the idea of coming to a consensus with lots of different viewpoints and networks that aren't our own traditional networks, and then work together around that common cause and take that kind of action that where Digital Rights Watch would like to see, to intervene into those various processes along the way and get some results.
Claire, we're coming down to the clock, but what's your view on, there's various comments, and thank you for everyone that's been active in the chat. And it hasn't been a single view. There's been some really terrific critical thinking in there as well, and pushback on people that are using AI and trying to find that sweet spot between, as we discussed earlier. Also calls for boycotts. Part of me thinks these are consumer products, they're only as powerful as the appetite. We know from the work Essential does that people have a deep distrust of AI, but particularly younger people are quite comfortable in using and consuming AI-generated culture. So what's the role of the consumer in this, Claire? And then maybe a bit of a round out for you as well.
Yeah, look, I think that's a really important question. Though, like I said, we need to make sure we're striking the balance between the onus we put on individual consumers and citizens and what we expect big tech to do in terms of how they engage with the community. Transparency and labelling would be something that would be really useful to consumers. So having a think about what would be useful to you as an individual existing in an AI world, I think is a really good place to start. But look, in terms of rounding up, this is a moment of opportunity because government hasn't landed on a position. This is an interim report from the Productivity Commission, who've had a long-standing view about this stuff. So in a lot of ways, not a surprise. If you are a practicing or an aspiring artist, join your guild. join your union, join your association. We are working on this together. I've emailed my members 3 times about this already this week. It's all over our socials. Your guilds, your unions, your association are working really hard on this because we think we are more likely to win if we stand together, right? That's our theory of change, stronger together. There's a number of other guild leaders on the call. I just want to say thank you to them for their support, for getting their members here and making sure that I can do things like this and do the media appearances. We couldn't do that if we weren't working together. And that's a great counterbalance to the huge power that Peter was talking about that the big firms bring to this. Also, if you're a practicing or an aspiring artist, commit to your practice. Don't use AI for creative tasks, not just because you are running the risk of being sued for copyright infringement yourself, which is an actual risk, and I don't want to undersell it. But if you believe in Australian creativity and the story you have to tell or the song you have to sing, sing it. Yeah? Commit to your creative practice. And your guild and your association, your union will be able to help you find your mentors and your people who will help you develop your craft. If you're not a practicing or an aspiring artist and you're on the call and you are someone who cares a lot about Australian stories, Australian voices, you are really important to your local MP. I got asked for some lobbying advice by one of the smaller guilds and they said, oh, what do I have to do? What do I have to turn up saying? What do I have to know? And I went, you need to know your postcode and that they are there to represent you. Go along, book a meeting and say, I want to talk to you about how much I love Bluey and Midnight Oil and the Ballad of Molly Johnson. And it's really important to me that we don't let big tech steal all of those things. You have senators for your state. You have power as a citizen. And I'm sorry to, Peter, be sending a bunch of people to your former colleagues who are going to have these calls to their offices.
No, it's the right thing.
All of us are citizens. These people are elected to represent us and we should be in their offices, in their email inboxes, on the phones going, I really care about this. You need to make a decision that looks after Australians, not big tech.
Thanks, Claire. Look, we're almost at the hour. I should also shout out MEAA has been running a campaign, Stop AI Theft, which again, either Google it or go to the MEAA site. There is a Privacy Now website that's supporting privacy reform. Digital Rights Watch, we put the link in the chat if you want to donate to that work. You know, what is the movement? It's not about building organisations, it's about building networks and common purpose. By registering today, you are now, unless you choose to opt out afterwards, on a list from Digital Rights Watch, which we will share this recording, including the bits of Toby that didn't quite come out clearly. Share that around. Look for opportunities to support each other. For those of you who are on social media, when you see someone shouting out around these issues, amplify it. Support Australian creators, support Australian musicians, read Australian books. Don't spend all your time falling in love with a chatbot or an AI companion. Find real people because that's where the songs are sung and the stories are made. So look, thanks everyone for being part of today. Thanks particularly for Pete. You were the catalyst for this town hall and thank you for your ongoing leadership. You were the first person I ever voted for as a very young man when you were standing for the NDP. So it's a bit of a fanboy moment. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Lizzie. And if you like these discussions, Lizzie and I do Burning Platforms every fortnight. So you should also jump onto that. That's our little podcast. But thanks a lot for being part of today. And we will be following it up with all of you. Cheers. And you've been listening to Burning Platforms. It was recorded on August 12 and produced on Naarm land by Rebecca Connell. Talk again soon.